Sean and Stephen had been inseparable since high school. They were the kind of friends everyone admired, even though they couldn't have been more different. Sean was the dreamer with a plan, always coming up with clever ideas to lift them out of poverty. Stephen, on the other hand, lived for the moment. A natural charmer, he thrived on attention, parties, and a revolving door of romantic flings. After college, their differences became impossible to ignore. Sean was driven, tirelessly working on his ideas and looking for ways to break into the business world. He spent countless hours researching, learning, and trying to make his mark. Stephen, however, seemed stuck in time. He still lived with his parents, content to coast through life, going from one wild night to the next. Sean often shared his ideas with Stephen, hoping to inspire him. "We could do this together," Sean would say. "I have a plan to start an online store. We can split the work and make real money." Stephen would laugh, leaning back in his chair with a drink in hand. "Relax, Sean. You're always so serious. Life isn't about work, it's about living. Come out with me tonight. You'll thank me." But Sean wouldn't give up on him. Every time he made progress, he tried to pull Stephen along, but Stephen never took the bait. "I'm good, bro," he'd say with a grin, his phone buzzing with yet another message from a girl. "You worry too much." Sean's frustration grew as the years passed. While he started small businesses, faced setbacks, and learned valuable lessons, Stephen stayed the same. He had no savings, no real plans for the future, and no desire to change. Sean loved his friend, but couldn't understand why Stephen wouldn't want more for himself. One night, Sean tried one last time to convince him. "Stephen, do you ever think about where we'll be in 10 years? Don't you want to move out of your parents' place, build something for yourself, maybe even settle down?" Stephen shrugged, swirling his drink. "I'm happy right now. That's all that matters. You keep chasing success, Sean. I'll be over here enjoying life." Sean realized then that he couldn't carry Stephen with him. He had to move forward, even if it meant leaving his best friend behind. It was a painful realization, but Sean knew he couldn't force Stephen to want a better life. As the years went by, Sean's hard work began to pay off. Sean's life took a dramatic turn when his business idea, Digital Isuzu, an innovative online savings platform, became a massive success. Investors poured in money, and within a few years, Sean was catapulted into wealth and fame. His name was featured in magazines, and his story inspired thousands. Sean had gone from being a dreamer with plans to a man living out those dreams. Stephen, though initially thrilled for his friend, found himself growing increasingly bitter. Despite his excitement, his attempts to reconnect with Sean proved futile. He would call, leave messages, and even send emails. But Sean never responded. Stephen began to feel abandoned, unable to understand why his once best friend seemed to have shut him out completely. Frustrated and hurt, Stephen resorted to showing old photos of them together to anyone who would listen. "Sean and I grew up together," he would say proudly. "We were like brothers. Everything he knows about hustle, he got from me. But now that he's rich, he's too good for me." At parties, Stephen would boast about their past adventures, painting a picture of brotherhood and loyalty that had been shattered by money. His words often carried an undertone of bitterness, especially when he claimed Sean forgot where he came from. He forgot who was there for him when no one else was. But Sean wasn't entirely the villain Stephen made him out to be. Life had changed for him in ways Stephen couldn't understand. Sean was now married, raising a young family and managing a rapidly growing business. He had little time for the past and even less patience for the guilt Stephen tried to lay on him. Sean had reached out a few times early in his success, offering to help Stephen start something of his own, but Stephen had brushed it off, still clinging to his old ways. Over time, Sean decided to focus on those who shared his vision and values, even if it meant cutting ties with Stephen. Stephen's calls went unanswered, and his attempts at emotional blackmail fell flat. Sean had moved on, leaving Stephen stuck in the shadows of a friendship that had long since faded. Stephen often sat alone, staring at the photos of their youth, wondering if things could ever go back to the way they were. But deep down, he knew the answer. Their lives had taken different paths, and Sean wasn't coming back. One fateful afternoon, Stephen bumped into an old mutual friend named Gentle. Back in the day, Gentle had been in the same boat as Sean and Stephen, struggling to make ends meet. But now, like Sean, Gentle had found success. He wore an expensive suit, drove a fancy car, and carried an air of confidence that screamed wealth. Stephen, eager to rekindle a connection, embraced Gentle warmly. They reminisced about the good old days, laughing at their youthful mischief and talking about how much things had changed. But it didn't take long for Stephen to bring up Sean. "Do you know what Sean's been up to lately?" Stephen asked, his voice tinged with bitterness. "That guy forgot all about me. We were like brothers, but now he acts like I don't exist. I've called him so many times, left messages, nothing. Just because he's rich now, he thinks he's too good for me." Gentle nodded sympathetically, a look of understanding on his face. "That's messed up, man," he said, shaking his head. "How can someone forget the people who were there for them before the money? That's not right." Stephen leaned in, his frustration bubbling over. "Exactly. And I was there for him every step of the way. Now he acts like he doesn't even know me." Gentle paused for a moment, then glanced around as if checking to see if anyone was listening. Lowering his voice, he said, "You know, I met him once. We talked for a while, and he confided in me. He told me he did blood money to get where he is." Stephen's eyes widened, his bitterness replaced with shock and curiosity. "Blood money? Are you serious?" Gentle nodded solemnly, his tone heavy with fake concern. "Yeah, man. He said it was the only way to make it big. That's why he's avoiding people from his past. He doesn't want anyone to know the truth." Stephen's mind raced as he processed what Gentle had said. It made sense to him, or at least he convinced himself it did. Sean's sudden wealth, his refusal to stay in touch, the way he seemed to have changed completely, it all fit. From that moment on, Stephen became obsessed with what Gentle had told him. The idea of Sean's success being tied to something dark and sinister consumed him. He started asking questions, digging for information, and piecing together rumors. He thought to himself, if this guy could do this to become wealthy, then I can do anything as well. Determined to change his fate, Stephen reached out to Gentle. He confessed his decision. "I'm ready to do it too, man," Stephen said. "Blood money or whatever it takes. I just don't have a clue where to start." Gentle smiled knowingly, as if this was exactly what he'd been waiting for. "Don't worry," he said. "I'll take you to someone who can help, a spiritualist. He's the real deal." A week later, they embarked on a journey deep into a remote village where Gentle claimed the seer lived. The place had an eerie stillness, with thick forests surrounding the small settlement. They finally arrived at a dimly lit hut where an old man with piercing eyes sat cross-legged on a mat. The air was thick with the smell of burning herbs, and strange symbols were painted on the walls. The seer looked Stephen over with an intense gaze before speaking. "I see greatness in you," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "But your destiny is being tied down by dark forces. To unlock your good fortune, you must prove your determination. Are you ready to do what it takes?" Stephen hesitated for a moment. "What do I have to do?" he asked, his voice shaky. The seer leaned in closer. "For 3 days and 3 nights, you must sleep in the graveyard. No food, no water. You must not speak to anyone or leave the grounds. Only then will the spirits release your blessings." Stephen's blood ran cold. The thought of spending 3 nights alone in a graveyard, surrounded by the dead, terrified him. He glanced at Gentle, hoping for reassurance. Gentle placed a firm hand on Stephen's shoulder and said, "Sean probably paid a similar or even worse price to get where he is. If he could do it, so can you. This is your chance, Stephen. Don't let fear stop you." Stephen clenched his fists, the bitterness and desperation in his heart outweighing his fear. He thought of all the nights he had spent dreaming of wealth, the parties he couldn't afford, and the life he thought he deserved. "I am ready," he said, his voice steady with newfound determination. The seer smiled, his teeth yellowed and crooked. "Good," he said. "Come back tomorrow night, and I will prepare you for the ritual." Stephen left the hut, feeling a mix of fear and exhilaration. Gentle walked beside him, whispering words of encouragement. "This is it, Stephen," Gentle said. "Your life is about to change." But deep down, Stephen couldn't shake the feeling that he was stepping into something far darker than he had anticipated. But he wouldn't let that stop him either way. The next day, Stephen arrived at the seer's hut, fully prepared for the spiritual encounter that would supposedly transform his life. His mind was set. He was ready to do whatever it took to escape the shadow of poverty and reclaim the respect he believed he deserved. The seer, dressed in a long robe adorned with strange symbols, began the preparation. He chanted in an unfamiliar language, sprinkling herbs over Stephen as smoke from a burning pot filled the air. Then he handed Stephen a small plastic bottle filled with a thick black liquid. "Take this," the seer instructed in a tone that sent chills down Stephen's spine. "At exactly midnight on the third day, drink every drop. After that, the grave you sleep in will be filled to the top with money. The deeper the grave, the more money you will receive. Remember, no food, no water, and no leaving the graveyard until the ritual is complete. If you fail, the spirits will not forgive you." Stephen's stomach churned at the thought of sleeping in a graveyard, surrounded by the dead, but the promise of unimaginable wealth gave him courage. He clenched the bottle tightly and nodded. "I understand," he said, his voice trembling. Gentle, who had accompanied him, gave him a reassuring pat on the back. "This is it, Stephen. 3 days and your life will never be the same. Think of Sean and how he probably did something just like this. You can do it too." Stephen tried to ignore the gnawing fear in his chest as he left the seer's hut, clutching the bottle and the promise of wealth it represented. That night he arrived at the graveyard the seer had described, a desolate, overgrown place filled with ancient tombstones and eerie silence. The moonlight barely illuminated the shadows of the graves, casting long, haunting shapes. The seer had instructed him to dig his sleeping spot with his own hands, so Stephen began digging, sweat pouring down his face despite the cool night air. With every scoop of earth, his emotions swung between terror and excitement. He couldn't stop thinking about the grave being filled to the top with money. The deeper he dug, the more his greed pushed him forward. By the time he finished, the grave was deep enough for him to stand in up to his waist. Exhausted but determined, Stephen climbed inside, his body trembling as he settled into the cold, damp earth. The reality of his surroundings hit him like a wave. He was truly sleeping among the dead. As the first night dragged on, Stephen's mind raced. Every sound, every whisper of wind felt like the spirits watching him. He tried to focus on the reward ahead. 3 days, and he would no longer feel inferior to Sean. He would have the wealth to fund his wild lifestyle and finally prove to everyone, including himself, that he was just as capable. Stephen clutched the black bottle tightly, its weight a constant reminder of the ritual's climax. He repeated to himself like a mantra, 3 days, just 3 days, and I'll have it all. Stephen's stomach began to churn with hunger just 6 hours into the ordeal. The pangs of emptiness clawed at him, but he reminded himself why he was doing this. If Sean could do it, so can I, he thought, steeling his resolve. The first day crawled by, and the second dragged even slower. Each moment felt like a test of his endurance and greed. Finally, at midnight on the third day, Stephen sat upright in his grave, clutching the small black bottle with trembling hands. The cold air bit at his skin, but his excitement drowned out all discomfort. He tipped the bottle back and swallowed the bitter liquid in one gulp, grimacing at the taste. His heart raced with anticipation. This is it, he thought. Soon the grave would fill up with money. Stephen sat back, staring into the darkness, waiting. He had already arranged with Gentle to bring a car around the same time, imagining the two of them stuffing the vehicle with cash. But as the minutes ticked by, Stephen began to feel drowsy. His eyelids grew heavy, and his head nodded forward. He fought hard against the pull of sleep, shaking himself awake. I can't miss my moment, he thought, but his efforts were futile. Suddenly, Stephen heard footsteps crunching through the undergrowth. Relief washed over him. It had to be Gentle. His figure emerged from the shadows, holding a flashlight, his face illuminated with an almost sinister grin. "Stephen, my guy, how's it going?" Gentle asked, peering down into the grave. "Did you drink the mixture Baba gave you?" "Yes," Stephen replied weakly, "but I started feeling very sleepy. I can barely stand. Please, help me pack up the money." Gentle chuckled, his voice carrying an unsettling tone. "Oh, Stephen," he said, shaking his head. "There is no money, good friend." Stephen froze, confusion mixing with the growing dread in his chest. "What do you mean?" he croaked, his voice barely above a whisper. Gentle's expression hardened, the grin slipping into something cold and unfeeling. "The witch doctor was arranged by me. The only reason you're here is because I was awarded a contract to get some organs, for a very good amount of money. Seeing how desperate you were, I cast the bait and you caught it. You've even made my job so much easier by digging your own grave." Stephen's blood ran cold as the truth hit him. He tried to scream, but his body was too weak. His limbs felt like lead, and his vision blurred. He struggled to stand, clawing at the dirt walls of the grave, but his strength failed him. "It's nothing personal, old friend," Gentle continued, his tone almost mocking. "It's just business." Stephen's mind raced, panic consuming him, but his body betrayed him. He slumped back into the grave, his breathing shallow and his vision darkened as he finally succumbed to the drug's effects. Gentle's voice was the last thing he heard, humming a cheerful tune as he prepared to finish his gruesome task. Gentle worked methodically, his hands steady and precise, cutting Stephen open with a skill that suggested this wasn't his first time. Stephen's days of starvation worked in Gentle's favor, reducing the mess and making the task more manageable. Every detail of Gentle's plan had been carefully calculated, and he executed it flawlessly. He removed Stephen's heart, liver, kidneys, and lungs with practiced ease, placing them neatly into an icebox waiting by his side. The chilled air from the box hissed softly as it preserved the grim cargo. Once the organs were secured, Gentle carefully closed up the grave, filling it with the same soil Stephen had dug out for his ill-fated ambition. The grave looked untouched, blending seamlessly with the surrounding terrain. Gentle stood back, admiring his work. There would be no loose ends. Nobody would ever connect him to Stephen's disappearance. Satisfied, he left the graveyard under the cover of darkness, carrying the icebox to his getaway vehicle. By the time dawn broke, Gentle was long gone, disappearing like a shadow, leaving no evidence behind. Weeks later, Sean sat in his lavish living room, scrolling through his phone when a news alert caught his eye. The headline read, "Man missing under mysterious circumstances." He froze as the name and photo appeared. Stephen. Sean's chest tightened. Despite their estranged relationship, the memories of their friendship flooded back. He immediately hired private investigators, sparing no expense in trying to locate his old friend. The investigators followed every lead, but it was as if Stephen had vanished into thin air. Every clue led to a dead end. Meanwhile, Gentle had already fled the country, his tracks expertly covered. His new life abroad was funded by the lucrative organ deal, and he carried on without a trace of guilt. Back home, Sean struggled to come to terms with the loss. Late at night, he would sit in silence, praying for his once best friend. Despite his prayers and efforts, Sean eventually had to accept the painful truth. Stephen might be gone for good, and there was nothing more he could do. In the end, the grave Stephen had dug with such high hopes became his final resting place, a silent testament to ambition twisted by desperation.